I've always had a deep connection with my mom. Growing up, I saw her as the epitome of strength and love. She was my protector, my constant, the one who made everything okay. Our home felt safe, warm, and full of love, at least, that's what I believed. As a child, you don't question the people who are supposed to take care of you. You take their care for granted, and you assume that they are impervious to hurt. My mom, to me, was invincible. She was a single parent, raising me on her own after my father left when I was young. She didn't talk much about him. Only when I asked, and even then it was brief. It's like she carried that weight silently, always focused on making sure I had everything I needed. But beyond the surface, I knew there was more. There was something I didn't fully understand. The older I got, the more I noticed subtle shifts in her behavior. Sometimes, she would get these faraway looks, her mind clearly elsewhere, like she was lost in thought. She'd smile, but it was forced, and I could tell there was something weighing her down. Still, we never spoke of it. Our conversations were simple, about school, life, my friends, and when it wasn't, we could always fall back on those comfortable silences that only mothers and their children can share. I wasn't blind, though. I saw the changes. The late nights, the increasing time she spent on her phone, the way she'd slip out sometimes without saying much, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek before leaving. But as a teenager, I didn't want to dig too deep. There's a part of you that wants to protect your parents as much as they protect you. I didn't ask questions because I didn't want the answers. My life was simple, and I liked it that way. But even with that, I couldn't help but notice that my mom wasn't as happy as she once was. And I couldn't help but wonder if I was to blame. Sometimes, I'd watch her when she thought I wasn't looking. Her fingers would trace the edges of a photo frame, her eyes lingering a bit too long on it. Her thoughts were clearly far away, and I could sense a deep sadness in her that I couldn't quite place. I'd watch her laugh or smile at something in the house, and it would feel like a mask, like she was pretending to be okay. I wanted to reach out, but I didn't know how. I think I could have asked her about it, but I never did. She was my mother, the one person I knew would always be there. I didn't want to complicate things by diving into whatever was clearly making her unhappy. But I started to wonder, was she still in love with my father? Did she miss him? Why was she suddenly becoming more distant, more withdrawn? It didn't make sense. I didn't have the answers, but something felt off. Still, I didn't push it. I kept my distance, not wanting to pry, not knowing how to confront her with the questions that were bubbling up inside of me. As time went on, the distance between us grew. It wasn't a huge gap, but it was noticeable. She was always busy at work, on the phone, running errands, and I was caught up in my own life as well. We shared fewer moments together, and the warm, intimate connection we once had seemed to be slipping away, though neither of us acknowledged it. I would find myself alone in the evenings, her bedroom door closed, the sound of her talking softly to someone I couldn't identify. I didn't think much of it at first. I just assumed she had her own things going on, adult things, things I wasn't part of yet. But there was always that nagging feeling. I had no reason to suspect anything serious. It was just a hunch. But hunches grow over time, don't they? They gnaw at you, pushing you to ask the uncomfortable questions you'd rather leave alone. I didn't know if I was ready to face whatever truth lay beyond those unanswered questions, but they were starting to weigh on me. The thought that my mom wasn't as perfect as I had always imagined her to be started to settle in. What if there was something about her that I didn't understand? Something hidden behind the walls she had carefully built around herself? I had no way of knowing then, but looking back, the signs were all there. Subtle, almost imperceptible shifts that I ignored because I wasn't ready to confront the reality that the woman I looked up to had her own vulnerabilities, her own broken parts. I wasn't ready to see her as someone who could hurt or be hurt. But the truth is, we all have our secrets, and hers were about to unravel, one painful thread at a time. It started with a simple, innocent mistake, or so I thought. I was looking for my phone charger one evening and found myself in my mom's bedroom, where I typically didn't spend much time anymore. I had been away at school for a few days, and the house felt unusually quiet when I came back. I figured my mom was at work or out with a friend, but something in the air felt different, like something was off. I was distracted, and in my search for the charger, my eyes landed on her phone, left carelessly on the nightstand. I wasn't a snooper. I had no reason to go through her things, especially not her phone. But the same gnawing feeling that had been bothering me for weeks, subtle but persistent, drove me to pick it up. I told myself I'd just glance at it for a moment, just to see if she had left me a message. It wasn't like I was looking for anything specific, but I couldn't ignore the growing discomfort inside me. Something was urging me to look. I unlocked the phone, my heart beating faster than it should have. The first thing I saw were text messages, unfamiliar ones, from a name I didn't recognize. My mind raced as I read the brief, cryptic exchanges between my mom and this person. There were flirty comments, inside jokes, and references to meeting up in places I didn't know. I scrolled down, heart pounding in my chest, the weight of each message sinking deeper into me. The words on the screen blurred as I read them again and again, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I told myself it couldn't be true. Maybe it was harmless. Maybe it was just a friend. But the more I read, the more I felt the pit in my stomach grow. There was nothing innocent about these exchanges. They weren't just friendly. The tone was far too intimate, too suggestive. I felt a wave of heat rush to my face, a mixture of anger and betrayal rising quickly inside me. My mom had been hiding this from me. For how long? Who was this person? And why had she been keeping it a secret? I froze for a moment, overwhelmed by 1,000 emotions. My hands shook as I scrolled through the messages, unable to tear my eyes away from the damning evidence before me. I couldn't understand why she would do this. I couldn't reconcile the mother I knew, the one who'd been so loving and supportive, with the person in these texts. She had been so distant lately, but I hadn't thought it meant something like this. My mind raced, the betrayal cutting deeper with every passing second. I wanted to scream, to confront her right there and then, but part of me was still in denial. I wanted to believe there was some explanation. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But then I came across a message that changed everything. The other person, this man, had left a message about meeting her later that evening. It was clear they were planning something. My mom was planning to meet him. The reality of it hit me like a slap in the face. I dropped the phone, my chest tightening, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I didn't know what to do. I had never felt so lost, so small. The person I spent the next few minutes pacing back and forth in the bathroom, my mind spinning. The walls around me felt suffocating, like the air had grown too thick to breathe. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and confusion, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the text messages flashing in front of me. I couldn't make sense of it. How could my mom, the person who'd always been there for me, do this? The thought of it twisted something deep inside of me. I felt a surge of heat rise in my chest as I tried to hold back the tears, my hands gripping the edge of the sink. I knew I couldn't keep running from this. I couldn't stay in this bathroom forever, pretending I hadn't seen what I had seen. I had to confront her. But a part of me was terrified. Terrified of the truth. Terrified of what I might hear. Terrified of how my world would change once I knew. My heart was torn. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to call her out and demand answers. The other part of me wanted to bury my head in the sand, pretend like I had never seen the messages, and try to move on. But there was no moving on from this. The truth was out, and now it was time to face it. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. I barely recognized myself. My eyes were red, my face pale. I looked like I had just aged 5 years and 5 minutes. How had I not seen this coming? My mother was always so distant lately. Her excuses about work and friends never added up. There had been something off about the way she acted, and now I knew why. The betrayal hit harder than I thought it would. The thoughts kept coming, faster, more frenzied. I thought about all the times we had spent together, all the laughter, all the quiet moments where I thought everything was perfect. Was it all a lie? Was I just naive? I couldn't shake the image of her laughing with someone else, sharing things with another man that I had always shared with her. I had no idea who he was or what he meant to her, but the thought of her with him made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't explain. My hand reached for the doorknob, and before I even realized what I was doing, I was walking down the hallway to her room. I felt like I was moving in slow motion, each step heavier than the last. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My mind was screaming at me to turn back, to avoid this confrontation, but I couldn't. I couldn't go back to pretending like everything was fine. I knocked on her bedroom door. It was a hesitant knock, barely audible, but it felt like thunder in the silence of the house. The seconds stretched on, feeling like hours, and I could hear her moving around inside. Finally, the door creaked open, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, but also something else. "Hey," she said, her voice soft, but I could hear the edge of worry creeping in. She must have sensed something was wrong, though she had no idea just how much I knew. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We need to talk." She looked at me, confused, but I saw the shift in her expression. She knew something was coming. I stepped into her room, and the door clicked shut behind me. I didn't want to look at her. I didn't want to face her. But I had no choice. "I know," I said, cutting through the silence. The words felt like a weight lifting from my chest, but they also felt like an accusation. I could see her tense up, her face flushing, her lips parting as if she was searching for something to say. But nothing came. "I know about the messages," I added, my voice trembling. I hated the way it sounded. So raw, so vulnerable. I hated the way I felt in that moment, standing before her, waiting for her to explain. But I couldn't wait anymore. I needed answers. "I know you're seeing someone else." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked as if she might collapse. Her hand pressed to her forehead, her breath shaky, like she was trying to process what I had just said. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, frozen. I could see the guilt in her eyes, and it felt like a punch to my gut. I didn't want you to find out like this," she finally whispered, her voice breaking. She looked so small in that moment, so vulnerable. But it didn't matter. The truth was out, and there was no going back. "Why, Mom?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why didn't you tell me?" She closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping. She looked so exhausted, like the weight of this secret had been crushing her for longer than I could imagine. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said softly. "I didn't know how to talk about it. It happened, and I didn't know what to do." My mind was reeling. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about all the years I had trusted her, believed in her, only to realize that she had been carrying this burden in silence. I wanted to scream, to demand answers. But I couldn't. All I could do was stare at her, my heart heavy with pain. She looked at me, her face tear-streaked. "I'm sorry, I never wanted to betray you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't want to lose you." Her words hit harder than I could have imagined. She had been so alone, so isolated, that she had turned to someone else for comfort. But the pain of it, of knowing she couldn't trust me, couldn't talk to me, cut deeper than the affair itself. She wasn't just hiding a relationship. She was hiding her loneliness, her vulnerability, her fear. And it was too much for her to handle alone. "I don't know what to say," I muttered, my throat tight. The tears I had been holding back finally broke free, and I turned away, not wanting her to see how much I was hurting. I didn't know if I could forgive her. I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. But I also didn't know how to walk away from her, either. The air between us felt thick, suffocating. I stood there, still unable to fully grasp the magnitude of what had just happened. My mind was scattered, thoughts fragmented, emotions running wild, and nothing seemed to make sense. I had confronted her. She admitted it. The words were out there, hanging in the air, but I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just about the affair. It was the hurt that came with it, the trust shattered, the betrayal deeper than I ever could have imagined. I wiped my face, the tears still falling freely, not sure if I was more angry or sad. It was like a cold hand had grabbed hold of my heart and was squeezing it, making it hard to breathe. For so long, I had thought of my mom as this strong, unbreakable figure, the one who would always have the answers. the one I could rely on. Now, I realized I had been looking at her through rose-colored glasses, blind to the cracks that had been there all along. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" Asked again, my voice hoarse, desperate for some kind of explanation that would make this all make sense. But I knew there was no easy answer. I could see it in her face, the guilt, the regret, the exhaustion of holding onto a secret for so long. She didn't have the perfect words to make it right. There was no "I'm sorry" that could fix this, no explanation that would wipe away the years of trust I'd given her. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said softly, looking away. "I thought if I kept it to myself, it would protect you. I thought I could handle it on my own, but I was wrong. I should have told you sooner. I'm so sorry." Her words were sincere,